Let's explore creating a pivot table where somebody supplies us with the data connection file, the ODC file. Now that ODC file could be connecting to any external database at all, SQL Server, Oracle, Box Pro, Access, anything really. All we need to be able to do is open that connection file, pull in the data that we want, and create our pivot table. The mechanics are insert pivot table, same as normal. Use an external data source rather than selecting a table or a range. Then we choose the connection. Now, if your Excel has managed to spot the connection existing on your computer already, which it might do, listed here, mine has in fact, training data, then we're one step ahead. If not, you simply click Browse for more, and it will start in your data sources, but there's nothing to stop you then going through your file system and trying to find the ODC file. Perhaps somebody emailed it to you and you saved it somewhere else instead of my data sources. Not a problem, it will still work. It doesn't have to be in this folder. I'm going to go with my training connection. Then I need to tell it where to put the pivot table. The existing sheet's fine because there's nothing else there. Okay. Now, because the password has not been saved in the ODC file, which is highly suggestible and recommended, I need to know the password. But I don't need to know anything else. I don't need to know the username or the actual server address. That can all be created for me in the ODC file. Okay. And then I'm presented with my pivot table layout and the columns from the data that has been set up in the ODC. So whatever the name of this particular view or table is, I don't know, but really I'm not that interested. I'm just interested in making use of the data. So from this particular data, I'm going to pull down the date field, closed, remove the quarters again, drop in the total price to here, which is assumed sum, which is what I want. I want it to add up the total price. We'll just do a little bit of formatting on the number, currency, okay, okay. And there's my total sum of price, the total value of everything sold. So we can see that there's a marked decrease as the years have passed by. Now, if I do another insert pivot table, choose an external data source, choose connection, now it knows this one is a connection within the workbook. So it's already stored within the workbook. If I want to add another one in, fine, I choose it from the list or I browse for it, open, tell it where to put the pivot table, current sheet's fine, okay. Again, password's not been stored in this connection file, so I need to know that. Notice the records are now loading. There's quite a few of them in this one. And we'll have date started again, removing the quarters, total price, assumed count rather than sum. So I need to go in there and change the sum. At the same time, let's change that into dollars. Okay, okay. And there we see in this particular case that the sum of total price actually has been increasing over the years. Now, these two pivot tables are connected to external data sources. They're connected to different external data sources, and I can see what these files are, at least by going to Data and Connections, and we see the two connection files here. One called ShopDB, View Purchase Made, and one called Training Data. I can visit that information through Properties, and you can see here we have a number of extra options. Enable Background Refresh, so it will connect to the data in the background, so you're not physically telling it to refresh, it just keeps having a look. Or we could physically tell the pivot table data to refresh every so many minutes, or refresh when opening. Lots of little connections that are possible for this particular connection to your SQL Server. Definition tells you the connection string there, table, and the command text. So the same for the other one, cancel, I want to make a connection there. Properties, I can do the same thing again about the refresh of the data, and I can visit the definition, so the connection string information. All of this data is now stored with this particular workbook and will stay with this workbook until you remove those data connections. So connections has an option of remove, but it will warn you if I try to remove that, it'll say anything using this data source obviously will no longer work. So my pivot tables won't work. Well, certainly the one connected to this particular data source. So it's not advisable unless you happen to have built up quite a history in here and you don't need some of them anymore. But those connection strings are stored externally anyway, so even if you remove them from this particular workbook, they're still stored as ODC files in your data sources in Windows. Here we've seen how we can use an external data connection, the ODC file, to create a pivot table and connect to that external data source without actually needing to know the structure of the data source or how to get hold of the data source. The only thing we need to know, if it isn't already saved in the ODC file, is the password. And then after that, we are in charge of making our pivot tables look and make sense.